Yo, boys, welcome back to Star Spangled Gamblers. As promised, summer is over and our hard-hitting, black eye-inducing election coverage has started for 2022. Joining us today in the lab is Andrew Tobias. Andrew is the chief political reporter at the Cleveland Plain Dealer. That is the actual name of the newspaper in Cleveland. Known better these days just by cleveland.com, because we all get our information from the internet, for better or for worse. Andrew, did I do you right? Is that actually who you are?
That's me, yeah.
Do you know what is like the apocryphal history? Was there a rival publication called like the Shaker Heights Muckracker or something in 1920?
You know, I should know more about the name of the newspaper and the history behind it. There were a bunch of different newspapers, like in every city, like there were in Cleveland. So the Cleveland Press was the alternative, a little more anodyne in like the name, I guess. So, but the Plain Dealer definitely cornered the market on cool newspaper names in town.
Yeah. I think that they sort of understood marketing a little bit better. Like press, okay, I kind of need that, but I do need a plain dealer. You know, I don't want to get jobbed by, some desk monkeys. So, good job to your ancestors, I suppose.
Yeah, they knew branding back then.
They were on top of it. Okay, so you're the big kahuna of state politics in Cleveland, Ohio, and I like to qualify our experts to the audience a little bit. So I sort of associate, when I meet guys like you who really, really, really know state politics at the kind of county and precinct level, I tend to think that they're like one of two guys. The first one is like the I camouflage myself like my prey kind of guys, and your prey, of course, is politicians. And they tend to be just sort of driving around the state in kind of like inauspicious Lincolns or Fords, blue button-down shirt, know everyone in the county courthouses who have like weird positions that actually matter. That would be one. And then the other kind is kind of your like crypt keepers, Game of Thrones Meisters type who just tell you weird random stories about Senator Taft and like with no context. Do you identify with either of those?
Those are pretty specific archetypes. I'll say, like, on the first thing, the thing that I've really enjoyed about the pandemic, which of course, like, tons of things to pick from there, just really great time. But I feel like casual dress has become even more of a thing for politicians included. So JD Vance at a campaign event on Saturday was just wearing jeans and a t-shirt. And I feel like I've really benefited from that. So yeah, I do try to show up and, dress like I belong there and not try to stand out too much. There was a guy from the RNC at the event wearing a blue blazer. And I feel like if nothing else, he seemed really hot. So,
okay, but like, we're not here to talk about men's fashion, but I do think now that ties have gone away, I already kind of miss them. Like, don't you think these guys look kind of like boneheads in their shirt sleeves?
I guess the potential is there, but for me, like, I guess I will say with the NBA, for instance, like you see the NBA coaches now wearing polo shirts instead of suits and ties. So that kind of does something to me there, but it's hard for me to really, I feel like, with politicians, I almost just don't see it anymore. So I guess I'm probably the wrong person to ask about whether, fashion choices for them specifically.
Boy, you're spot on, because I think Pat Riley was like basically the apotheosis of men. Like, who has ever looked better than Pat Riley in the 80s?
Yeah, Armani, like it's hard to really step up to that,
Yeah. Okay, well, who am I to complain? I'm sitting here wearing a wrinkled polo shirt for my travel bag. So, far be it from a political commentator to be a bit of a hypocrite too. Okay, but what we're really here to talk about. We're not here to talk about Senator Taft or bad men's fashion. What do you like? What Star Spangled Gamblers? Number one story of the news is, of course. You want to finish my sentence for me?
The Senate race.
That's right. We got to talk about our boy Pat Ryan, not Pat Ryan, Tim Ryan and JD Vance. So can I set the table a little bit and then maybe let you do the talking?
Sure.
Okay. So Ohio, infamous state in American politics, probably hasn't been an era in our nation's history where Ohio wasn't kind of like one of, if not the pivotal regions. Very unpredictable politics in Ohio. Looking back through recent history, swung 5 points to the left from George W. Bush to Barack Obama, 8 points to the right from Barack Obama to Donald Trump in 2016. Unpredictability also culturally, for what it's worth. Most recently, Ohioans shocking the world, signing Deshaun Watson to a $200 million contract. Just very hard, very large state, hard to understand. So to kick this off, my question to you is, polls are surprisingly showing Democrat Tim Ryan kind of neck and neck with Republican JD Vance, but prediction markets, betting markets are thinking that this is actually going to be a very predictable race, and that whatever the polls say today, JD Vance has currently a 75% chance of winning this race when it's all said and done. So Do you think that's fair? Is that the right reading of the runes, or is there something that we don't?
Yeah, so there are a couple of things that are probably contributing to that. One is that the polls recently have had problems kind of broadly, and I won't belabor that because I think people have heard about that story. But in Ohio, particularly, they've been pretty bad in terms of undercounting Republican support. In 2016, it basically showed a tied race. There's some polls that kind of broke late for Hillary Clinton that year, but that was, there was that. But then so kind of we tried to control for that in 2020, and the polls were fairly similar, and they were showing maybe Trump winning by 2 or 3. He won by 7 or 8 again, just like he did in 2016. And even in 2018, if you were to talk to state Republicans for the midterm elections that year, they were basically expecting to lose. Even their internal polling was showing them pretty much down across the board by a few points, including Mike DeWine, who's the governor now. They basically swept the races besides the state Supreme Court races, which didn't have partisan affiliation on the ballot, so it almost doesn't count in terms of measuring Republican support. So just there's been this consistent recent history of polls failing to capture the extent of Republican support, and there may be reasons for that. But and then besides that, the other factor I think that explains why people just kind of expect Vance, is favored to win despite what the polls say, is that the environment here has been really strange. So Tim Ryan's been fundraising really, really well. A lot of his money comes from the Act Blue network, which I don't actually understand how it works because I don't donate to it, but it's like, I'm trying to take on JD Vance, like RT if you agree, and then people give them $5.
It's the spammy text messages and emails and stuff, right?
Yeah, so Tim Ryan's been really good at that, and JD Vance has been bad at fundraising generally. Just there's some reasons I can get into if you want. And so over the summer, you saw Tim Ryan running a lot of ads, basically unanswered, had the opportunity to basically try to soften up Vance, who's never run for office before, much less statewide, kind of hope to define himself. Tim Ryan looks like a normal person if you're from Ohio. His ads
Right.
show him in a hoodie, for our fashion discussion earlier, that
Right.
plays well here. But on the other hand, Mitch McConnell's super PAC has just announced they're going to spend something like $30 million in ads here starting next week. And so everybody just assumes that between kind of elections normalizing and tightening closer to the actual election date, and then, sort of the answering ads that that's going to kind of, push along with kind of the state's rightward tilt to kind of just push JD Vance over the top. Although, polls are very consistent that he is underperforming Mike DeWine, who has kind of both much more well-known, also probably more of like a moderate, even possible Democratic crossover appeal. So I guess we'll see how it goes. But I don't know the percentages, but I think if you were to say, is it more likely than not that JD Vance will win? That's how I see it. So yeah.
Okay. So underperforming the incumbent Republican governor, Mike DeWine. But I don't know if you know this about Star Spangled Gamblers. Until very recently, we were a Los Angeles-based podcast. We're very, culture forward. Some might even say extremely woke. So let's talk about the culture here. I'm going to describe JD Vance. Beard, Yale law degree, biracial marriage, Silicon Valley. What Republican wants to vote for that?
It's kind of a tough biography, honestly. That's one of the reasons that I think that Ryan has the opportunity to kind of try to define himself. Ryan was a high school quarterback. He went to a private Catholic high school in the Youngstown area. Again, just seems like the kind of guy who would drink a beer. It's kind of like the classic, would you want to have a beer with this guy kind of test. So JD Vance had spent time in Silicon Valley. He's got this column that Democrats like to pull up where he's talking about, going out for brunch and then visiting the wineries afterwards. It's just
his garden tours in San Francisco and the Atlantic.
Yeah. And it's just culturally not a really good fit. But, Vance, did grow up in Middletown, which is one of the many industrial towns in Ohio that has hurt from, the effects of globalization and manufacturing base being lost and the jobs being lost along with it. So he is, he does come from that cloth. So it's not like he's a total outsider in the state, but it is, like you said, just kind of like the elite education, kind of like the connections with Silicon Valley and California. That's something that they're going to try to play up.
So you mentioned that he was having trouble. By he, I'm talking about Republican JD Vance right now, that he was having trouble fundraising. So my understanding of this is that JD Vance is basically just sitting on his couch and texting Peter Thiel basically fuck you, pay me, and not just cold calling donors and spamming them with texts and stuff the way good politicians do, where they just like relentlessly never leave you alone until you give them money. Is that where you were going with that, or is there some more profound lesson here?
Yeah, so I don't really any visibility into like how much call time Vance is making or how many like late night texts he sent to Peter Thiel. But after he won the May primary, and by the way, so the May primary had, I would say, five legitimate candidates who may have all won the nomination, and I didn't prepare for this to look up what the number of tens of millions of dollars that was spent in that race. Is by far the most expensive race in Ohio history. Peter Thiel personally donated $15 million to a super PAC that was supporting Vance. You had a guy named Mike Gibbons who he is worth hundreds of millions of dollars. I want to say he spent $20 million of his own money on the race. Just that was the dynamic. And so you saw a lot of donors here were just totally tapped out. They just didn't have any more money, like to some degree. And, especially when they started getting these fundraising appeals after the primary, they're like, well, Peter Thiel is just going to stroke you a check. So why would I, mess up my tax, my elaborate tax plans for this year by donating more? And so there's besides that, there was also, some consolidation he had to do. There's some, I'd say there's some discomfort among sort of like the standard Republican donor in Ohio with how far to the right Vance is on some cultural issues, especially. And so, whether there's something that he could have done more from like working harder or mechanical things, like he brought in the fundraising staff from some of the other candidates eventually. Maybe he could have done that sooner. But basically, when Vance reported his campaign finance numbers in June, it was almost like that's when you started seeing the stories in our publication and nationally that it was like south of freaking out, but like north of concern of right. As far as what the disparity was in the race. And so you've seen that dynamic play out for a few months, and that's kind of sort of consummated with Mitch McConnell's super PAC committing $30 million to the state.
So that's interesting because it's a story you hear across a lot of these states where there were competitive primaries. Like I think after Oz finally won that Pennsylvania primary, people were like, why is Dr. Oz on vacation or something? And it sounds like, in a sense, maybe these politicians didn't have a choice because their donors and their staff were just so exhausted from the primaries that, what was the benefit of being out raising money and knocking on doors again after them?
Yeah, so I'm not really sure what he was doing, but when, it was noted that after the primary that Vance kind of went dark and people assumed that he was fundraising. And then when the fundraising numbers didn't show up, that's when you started seeing even concern about like, what is this guy doing from the Republican operative level.
Well, okay, so let's go. I'm going to ask you questions about stuff that we don't really know about because I'm from Louisville, Kentucky. I should say that. That's my homeland. But that's basically Cincinnati adjacent. I have no idea how people in Cuyahoga County and Cleveland and Columbus think about the world. So I guess I'll just maybe prime you and ask, is it a coincidence that the Democratic candidate, what's his face, is running from Northern Ohio versus J.D. Vance down in the sort of Cincinnati metropolitan area? The Republican is from Southern Ohio. Is that like a known fracture in state politics, or is there a better kind of aphorism to use?
Yeah, Vance doesn't really fit into that framework because he won the Republican primary largely because Donald Trump endorsed him. And so it's kind of there's this history of like the regions of Ohio and kind of what their characters are. And it kind of adds up to what used to be sort of like the consummate swing state. Vance is kind of outside of that completely because he, just for a lot of reasons, Trump has kind of turned things like that on their head. But I would say, Ryan coming from Northeast Ohio, that is kind of like bread and butter Democratic politics. The Cleveland area and then Youngstown, which is kind of more like similar to Pittsburgh, I would say, but it's basically Rust Belt towns, like not that different. They just kind of
what does that even mean anymore? Like I feel like no one really knows what that, or at least I don't know what that means anymore. A Rust Belt town, what the politics of that is.
Well, it is, historically, I would just say Cleveland and then Youngstown by extension, kind of culturally more are similar to almost like an East Coast city, but then the surrounding areas. People, when the national news goes to Youngstown and interviews, this Youngstown diner, these voters are thinking about, the January 6th committee hearings or whatever. Yeah. They really mean the areas outside of Youngstown, where it's largely kind of a white, almost like there's a little bit of a rural character, but there are suburbs in the Cleveland area too, where they're basically working class suburbs that have, a large number of white voters, and kind of like the vaunted like white voter without a college degree can be found there. But anyways, Democrats traditionally did really well. Cleveland is still one of like the largest source of Democratic votes in the state. Youngstown, though, particularly, what is sort of an example of the sort of more like middle-sized manufacturing town that used to be very reliably Democratic. Even as recently as 2012, Barack Obama won the county. Again, I don't have the number off the top of my head, but Trumbull County is the county where Tim Ryan's actually from. I want to say Obama won by like 10, 15, 20 points. Trump won Trumbull County in 2020 and maybe 2016 too. So that's just like the kind of swing that you see. But anyways, like back to the cultural question, that's just, Tim Ryan, the idea behind his candidacy is that he looks like and talks like a guy who's from that part of the state, very working class, kind of like in its general orientation, kind of ethnic, like he's both Italian and Irish American. And so that's kind of like the two big groups there ethnically. And that part of the state, more broadly speaking, is a type of Democratic, voter and candidate that we've kind of seen historically. So, like you said, Southern Ohio is very different. Cincinnati is almost like a Southern town in some ways, but, I won't belabor this too much further. But yeah, so that's Tim Ryan is the kind of candidate that Democrats would have run in the past for this kind of thing, for sure.
So he said something that I was like, are you sure, bro? He was saying that he thought he could win Eastern European voters, which I sort of took to be ciphers for like first, second, third generation, middle class white voters because of his like pro-Ukraine stance or something like that. And I heard him say that, and I was like, I'm not so sure about that. I'm not so sure that 70 K a year households are thinking about the Ukraine when they go vote. They might be thinking about price increases or something else.
Yeah, no, that's another throwback actually. So just Cleveland particularly has a history of producing kind of white ethnic politicians. So like Dennis Kucinich is somebody you're probably familiar with.
What a legend.
George Voinovich.
What a legend.
Then John Kasich, who people in Cleveland will call Kasich, and it sounds like they're mispronouncing his name, but it's actually like a term of endearment. So we have something like 80,000 Ukrainian Americans in the Cleveland area. I don't know, it's like basically an interest group, but then there's also kind of like this cultural extension. And I don't know how to quantify that, but there are people who speak, if you go to Cleveland, like go to a coffee shop in some of the older parts of town, you will hear people speaking Russian. It is actually a thing where there are people of that descent. I don't know if it's enough to like tip an election, but somebody like Tim Ryan is definitely trying to stack different interest groups into sort of like a narrow victory. So it actually does make political sense for him to say something like that.
Interesting. Well, okay, maybe I'll go watch The Deer Hunter again this weekend and see what Christopher Walken can tell me about.
Yeah, filmed in Cleveland. So
really, I didn't realize that.
The beginning part, not the later parts, the happy part.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, it gets pretty dark pretty fast, but what a classic. Well, I'm going to take us to the speed round in just a minute here, but you sort of hinted at like a couple heuristics you use to sort of understand the state. It's just so you know, a lot of people listening to this will probably go open like an Excel spreadsheet and start putting in like counties and past election returns and stuff. So I'm wondering, like, how do you digest returns and information? Like, are there certain indicators? You mentioned sort of Obama-Trump counties in Northeast Ohio, certain things that you look for to sort of understand what's going on. A place that JD Vance or Tim Ryan has to run up the score if they've got a chance to win. You know the type of stuff I'm talking about. Is there anything like that you think that our listeners should get woke to?
So the path to victory for a Democrat in Ohio it's honestly not clear what it is completely. The best example that we have sort of in post like the realignment that Trump created or, maybe typified is 2018. Sherrod Brown won by like 7 points for reelection. And that year he ran against a candidate who had never run for statewide office before, who's badly funded, who kind of sparred with Mitch McConnell over who let who down with regards to fundraising and stuff like that. But so Brown basically was able to win. I always look at the counties along Northern Ohio, along Lake Erie, which again just are spotted with this kinds of like medium-sized manufacturing towns, as well as the Youngstown area. Trumbull County is really a bellwether that I use, that I talked about earlier, because it's not only kind of demographically typical of this kind of stuff, but it's also like pretty big. So I look at how if JD Vance is winning Trumbull County on election night by a wide margin, I would say that's a sign that Tim Ryan's going to lose, because part of the sort of theory for his campaign is that because he's known there and because he's from there, he might be able to do better and kind of reverse some of the losses that they've had. So if a Democrat's going to win, like there's sort of three things they have to do. One is run up the score in the three C's is what people call them, but Cleveland, Columbus, and Cincinnati. Hillary Clinton and Joe Biden both hit their numbers in those counties of kind of what they were shooting for, and they still lost just because Trump, instead of winning 65-35, 70-30 in the rural areas, he's winning like 90-10. And he was also juicing turnout in those areas in a way that, hadn't historically high numbers. And so Ryan also has to basically not get killed in the rural areas. And that can be harder to keep track of just because there's so many pieces and parts to that, but maybe look at like Scioto County is potentially a bellwether for like Appalachia. Maybe like Northwestern Ohio, like Defiance County or something like that. But
what a name.
Yeah. But then, so like as far as like the bellwethers though, generally speaking, Wood, Trumbull, and Lake counties have been really good in terms of like matching the statewide vote numbers in recent history. And that's what I look at.
And then if you were to flip it upside down, like I remember there was a Louisiana gubernatorial race where it was really important to see if like a kind of ruby red wealthy suburban county came in. Like, is there like, I don't know, Claremont County or Warren or like somewhere outside of Cincinnati that could tell you whether or not JD Vance could get the necessary number of kind of college educated suburbanites, or is this it? Is this the single aphorism of those counties that you just rattled off?
Yeah. So actually, the third thing I should have mentioned is that Tim Ryan's trying to kind of like consolidate the college educated white voter. And so Delaware County in suburban Columbus is a place where Democrats have kind of like shown signs of winning. It's the highest level of college education on average in the state. It's just north of Columbus, a lot of high income area. There was a special election there in 2018 that the Democratic candidate won Delaware County, but still lost the race. And so it is possible. So that's one that we look at. And you mentioned in Southwest Ohio and Cincinnati, I'd probably look at Butler County. As far as it is, Cincinnati is definitely culturally more conservative and more Republican. And so, if you're looking at a percentage there, if JD Vance gets like 65% of the vote there, he's probably all right. So, but yeah, you really, Tim Ryan sort of, his path to victory involves getting big votes in the three big cities, winning the suburbs, frankly, which is something that Democrats have not generally been able to do. And then also trying to hold down just deep losses in the rural counties.
Are you going to get some nasty grams? I think that was the first time we've talked about Columbus. I mean, is that like Columbus's lot in life is to just get negged by Cincinnati and Cleveland?
Like I'm a Cleveland guy, so I definitely view it that way. Like Columbus historically has been known as a test market, which just kind of like by definition means that it lacks sort of distinctive character. It's just like very average, but
very average.
But on the other hand, like Columbus has grown, and like one of the stories in the news that you hear about is Intel's building like a $20 billion plant here that might be as big as $100 billion, like hiring thousands of people. Columbus is economically growing, and the future success for Democrats basically relies on Columbus getting big enough where it starts being like the way that Atlanta is in Georgia, or I guess that's actually like the best example I can think of. Maybe there's others of just like one big city kind of anchoring kind of like, offsetting some of the more like right leaning parts of like other parts of the state. So, but yeah, so Columbus is really that's like where the dynamic shift in Democratic politics is probably going to be over time, but also like not the most culturally exciting place to be.
Interesting. That is actually precisely my memory of Columbus is I have none. It's just a flat place with some buildings.
I mean, I live here. I like living here. So it's just, like maybe it doesn't have a lot to offer for like your traveler, which I'm sure like if people hear this, I'm going to get inundated with all the great stuff to do in Columbus. So I'm sorry. But
I mean, Saturdays in the fall, right?
Yeah, that's the big one. Yeah, college football's huge here.
And then whatever Greg Oden's doing. Okay. All right. So we're going to go to the speed round now. Okay. So would you rather? I'm just going to ask you, would you rather? Feel free to editorialize a little bit, but you don't need to, speak, in paragraphs if you don't want to. Okay. Right now, okay, would you rather take JD Vance at 70 cents, 70% odds to win in Ohio, or John Fetterman next door in Pennsylvania at 75 cents to win there?
I'd go with Fetterman.
Really? You think that are you on like the Dr. Oz fake news train?
What do you mean by that? You have to qualify what you mean.
Oh, that he's like a garbage candidate and has no chance of winning.
Yeah, I don't follow Pennsylvania politics, but just to the extent that like Western Pennsylvania is similar to Eastern Ohio, and I just have a hard time, like politics has become so cultural, but just like giant guy in beard and hoodie versus like Hollywood celebrity. I just have a hard time seeing that like overcoming those currents. And then when you add in with Pennsylvania, like the whole Philadelphia, like that area, that kind of stuff. So
Got it. I will say that I feel like these kind of like Peter Thiel, Donald Trump candidates are almost hamstrung by the fact that they would probably be the perfect candidate if they actually said what they thought. But I feel like they're kind of reading from a script that MAGA Inc. gave them, and they just sound a little bit phony.
yeah, Vance is he is a pretty good candidate as far as this is biography. Like he's very smart. Like he's a pretty good communicator. So it's just like a lot of the consternation has been around his fundraising, really, and then also like he's just shown some signs of maybe being inexperienced and stuff like that. But actually, he's the kind of guy just like on paper that would be a good match for Ohio. Notwithstanding like the whole Silicon Valley winery tour kind of thing that you hear about.
Right. All right. Speed round. Would you rather? Would you rather say that Ohio is a red state or that Virginia is a blue state?
Virginia is a blue state.
I have nothing smart to say about that, but I'm glad to hear that that's what you think. Would you rather say that local Republicans are starting to panic about J.D. Vance or that they're quite confident that he is their guy?
I think they're confident. It goes back to like what I said before where they're worried, but I just think they think things are going to break once these ads start running. So I think, Mitch McConnell really did kind of bail out his campaign just from like a financial point.
Got it. Okay. Would you rather bet that Mike DeWine, the incumbent Republican, well, I'm actually going to back this up. One of the financial products, one of the bonds that political wagering offers is you can bet against psychotic MAGA people on whether or not Trump will be the president in the next couple of months. So with that as a prologue, would you rather bet that Mike DeWine loses this race for 7 cents or like a 22-1 payout, or that Donald Trump will be president on January 6, 2023 for 5 cents. So 7% that DeWine loses, 5 cents that Trump's the president next year.
Yeah, I'm really not like a gambling guy. So like the odds kind of like make my head spin a little bit, but I think it's much more likely that Mike DeWine's reelected than Donald Trump becomes president again.
I literally can't believe that there are people out there who are putting money up to bet that Donald Trump magically becomes the president.
And just to be clear, they could both happen. But, like DeWine is we'll see how this goes, but he's generally polling to win by like 15 points. And I generally believe that.
Okay. Speed round. Questions from the boys. Ben in Houston wants to know if Cincinnati Mayor Aftab Puraval is the real thing. I don't know if I said his name right. Do you follow this guy?
Yeah, you said it right, actually. By the real thing, like I hear good things about him from people who know him personally. He narrowly lost a race for Congress, could have gotten there. I hear that he's had Liz Smith is kind of advising him, and she kind of lifted up Mayor Pete out of obscurity in South Bend, Indiana, to kind of be sort of like more of a national figure. So I don't know if that trajectory specifically is there for him, but he's smart. He's savvy. Like I said, people that know him personally speak well of him. So, but he's just somebody who's very unseasoned, like from a statewide political standpoint, and kind of breaking out for Democrats in Ohio is honestly going to be harder for similar reasons why, Mayor Pete had a hard time breaking out after losing for state treasurer in Indiana. So.
Got it. Okay. And then lastly, do you remember, well, we're going to call it, because you have a good job. We're going to call it Kill, Kiss, Marry. Are you okay with playing this game with some Ohio cultural artifacts just to send us out on a comedic note?
Sure.
Okay. Kill, Kiss, Marry. Some of you have a different name for that. Ohio at the movies. So Major League, Tommy Boy, The Ides of March. Which depiction of Ohio do you think deserves to be buried in a grave?
I would go with Tommy Boy. Like it's a fun movie. I just don't really know like what it does like for the state. I love Major League, so it's kind of like cringy now with like for a lot of reasons. But I still have a huge soft spot for it. So I'm probably not like actually breaking these apart. And then the Ides of March, that's like the political thriller with like very boring, very serious.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm not a big Ides of March guy.
Yeah, so let's go. I'm going to marry Major League. I'm going to kill Tommy Boy. And then I guess I'll kiss Ides of March just because it's left over.
Interesting. I might actually flip your... you know what? I think Major League has like accidentally just become an iconic 90s or 80s or whatever era movie that is. I don't think there would be an America without Charlie Sheen doing ridiculous things as the Wild Thing. Tom Berenger. There's just a lot of good in that. I think you're right. I think we need to marry that. Tommy Boy, I'm a fan. I want to keep it by my side. I'll give it a smooch. The Ides of March. all we got out of the Ides of March was House of Cards, and that was worth it. But I don't think we needed it. I think we can put it in a shallow grave somewhere out by the Erie Canal. That's my perspective. All right, Andrew, tell people where they can find you, remind them who you are, and the floor is yours.
Yeah, so I'm the chief political reporter at the Plain Dealer. I'm actually based out of Columbus. I cover the State House here too. I'm kind of settling into my new job, but I've been covering the Senate race. You can follow me at Twitter at Andrew J. Tobias. I don't tweet a whole lot. I tweet some about like Cleveland sports and stuff like that. So I apologize if that's not your thing. Just like steer clear. But yeah, that's where you can find me, and I'll be going out on the trail with these candidates more in the coming weeks. So that's your place if you want to find out where I'm at.
All right, Andrew Tobias, the Plain Dealer. We were lucky to have you. Thank you, and good luck this campaign season. It's going to be a lot, right?
Yeah.
Thanks,